In this video, we're going to take one more step in cleaning our data to get it ready for our modeling. And this is the shorthand way of writing our model that we introduced in the last video. And we're going to use this as the basis for our work in this video. This will be our guide. And you can see that I have each of the variables in my model are written here. And I've indicated whether they're continuous or categorical. And for the predictor side of the model, for those variables that are continuous, I've left them blank because for each one we're going to have to decide if we're going to model them as categorical or continuous. We have the choice of changing continuous variables into categorical variables, except when it is our outcome variable. Now, cleaning your variables and getting them ready for modeling is going to be different for everyone because your models are all different. And so what I'm going to be doing is using my models as an example, and I will be introducing some SAS tools that you can use to clean your data and recode them. But for your particular models, you're going to have to figure out how to use those tools to clean your data that you have in particular. So what we should do is we should just open up a line of communication, and when you're having trouble, you just contact me and we'll try to work through the individual problems that you're meeting along the way. So this process is part of creating our working data. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add these new edits to the SAS code that I've already created for creating the working data. And if you remember, we put that SAS code inside the working data folder. It says create working data version 1. And so one thing I want to show you here is that if you click on the SAS file itself, it's going to open up in the wrong program. SAS opens up in the SAS Enterprise Guide, which is a different program than what we've been using to edit our code. So we actually don't want to open the program by clicking on it in the folder. What we want to do is we want to actually go to the SAS, just open the SAS program inside from our start menu. And then we want to open up the program, or rather the SAS file that we want by hitting we're in the editor window, we hit the open file, and then we go to our SAS code. I have that in the NHANES, working data, and create working data version 1. Now, I'm going to be editing this, and so at this point I'm going to create version 2. So I just go over here, File, Save As, and I'm just going to create version 2. And so what this does is if I, for some reason, make a big mistake here and I break my code, I always have this fallback data set, version 1, that I can go back to where I know everything is working correctly. So that's a very good habit to get into. Now you'll remember in this SAS code, we read in the data, we took the variables that we wanted from each of the data sets, and then we merged them together within a cycle, and then we stacked them on top of each other using this data and set statement. And then finally, we wrote the data to the hard drive. Now, we're going to want to take the same last step here. And but what we want to do is we want to do some more editing on the data prior to that. So I'm just going to move this down and get it out of the way. And so this section here, I'm going to just create a new section. And remember, if you put an asterisk, that starts a comment. So I'm just going to call this recode and clean data. And sometimes this is the way I write a comment if I want it to be very visible easily. Just put a row of asterisks on both sides and use capital letters. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking each variable one by one and making decisions about how to code them and doing that using Sass. And I'm going to be taking them out of order from what we see here, and I'm choosing the order based upon the best way to introduce the different kinds of Sass tools that we're going to be using to do this work of cleaning and recoding the variables. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing that I want to do actually is I want to get the version of working data that this working data Sass code created initially. I want to get that into the working memory. And you can see that the last step down here is to stack the two data sets that we created through the merge and put them into the working memory and call that work data. And so what I can do is I can just run the entire thing. So I'll just hit this button. And I'll look at the log file to make sure that everything went okay. I see a warning here. What is this? Unable to copy the registry to work registry. Because of this, you will not see registry customizations during this session. That's not a problem. So my lib names were assigned okay. It's finding all of the data sets. Everything is blue. Let's see how the merge went. Sorting them. Where's the merge? Okay, here's the first merge. Looks like the merge here went fine. The second merge is also okay. And then the stack is fine. So my final work data has 20,686 observations and 26 variables. That sounds about right. So now I have that data set in work data, and I can begin to work with it. So I'm going to just call it data work data set work data. And remember, this is how you just tell Sass that you want to work with the data that are in the working memory of the computer with the marker called work data. You just use the same name twice. Now, the first thing that I want to do here is I'm going to limit the age range in the work data. And my data, I'm only going to be using individuals who are 20 years and older because that's the age range for which the smoking questionnaire information was collected. So what I want to do is I want to limit this to age 20 and above. And I'm just going to put a little comment here to say that. So I'm going to say limit working data to ages greater than or equal to 20. And then I end it with a semicolon. And so this line of code is just a comment. Anything between a first asterisk, everything after that is a comment until you hit a semicolon. And so if I take the semicolon off this next line over here, this becomes part of the comment because there's a semicolon there. But as soon as I put a semicolon back over here, this becomes code that Sass will read when it's going through the code and running it. Now, the way we limit a data set is after the data set statement, we use an if statement. And so what it's going to do is it's going to go through each line of code, or not code, I'm sorry, each line of data in work data. And it's going to look at what follows this if statement. And it's going to look at each individual in the data set. And if this statement, whatever we put here, is true, it's going to include that person in the new working data set. If that is false, it's going to exclude. And so what I want to do here is I want to put if the age is greater than or equal to 20, because those are the people that I want Sass to include in the working data that it puts into the working memory. So I'm actually going to change the data that are in the working memory and that have the label work data. It's going to read these data from the working memory. Then it's going to limit those data based upon the age and put that back into working memory and give it the same label name. Now, if I wanted to have two versions of the data, I could put a new label name here. For example, I could call this work data 2, or I could call it something a little more meaningful. I could call it work data 20, meaning that it's the age is 20 or above, or even better, I could say like age is 20, something like that. Then I would actually have two data sets in the working memory. One is the full working data with the marker work data, and another one which is called work data ages 20, which is a limited data set. Now, I don't need the data for people who are under 20. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that at this stage. I don't need to have two versions of the data set. Once I've limited it to people over 20, that's fine for me because that's all I need to work with. So how do I do that? What I have to do is I have to just tell SAS, after this if statement, what do I want it to check for truth in order to include somebody? So I need the variable name in the working data for the age of the individual. And what I can do to find that is I can come back over here and find the variable name for age. Let's see, where is it? There it is. This is the age in months at the exam. And so this is in months. So I'm going to take this variable and I'm going to use this variable and I'm going to use this variable right here. And if this value is greater than or equal to 20 years. Now, what do I have to do here? These are in months. So there are 12 months in a year. So at age 20, you've been alive for 240 months. So I'm going to say if the age in months is greater than or equal to 240. Let me separate this out so it's a little bit easier to see. And then a semicolon. Now here's something we haven't seen before is greater than or equal to. So you can have greater than or equal to using the greater than sign and the equal sign. You could also say equals to or greater than. The order doesn't make any difference, but I just usually put it in the order that I say it. So greater than or equal to 240, and then a semicolon. Now this is enough to do it. Let's run this and see what happens. And I actually learned recently that if you highlight something, you don't have to go through the right click and submit selection. Actually, if you highlight something, the submit button up here just runs what you highlight. So that's more convenient. So let's go to the log file and see what happened. So you can see here it worked. So originally in the work data, we had 20,686 observations. This is the number of individuals. And so it's read that in. And then now what it's done is it has limited it to those individuals aged 240 months or more. And there are 10,989 individuals who meet that criterion. And now our work data has been limited to these individuals. Let's just do a quick proc univariate to make sure things worked okay. Let's do proc univariate. Actually, let me do it like this so that it's just clearer. Data, work data, set work data, proc univariate. And variable is going to be this one. And let's run that. Let's see how that goes. So I just choose that, do that. I should get some output here. Let's first look at the log file, make sure it ran okay. Everything looks blue, looks fine. So let's look at the output. Let's look over here. Okay, so here are the ages and months. The minimum value is 240, that's correct. So the youngest age is age 20, and it goes all the way up to 959 months, whatever that age is. The median age is 576 months. So you can see, we can see that it looks like it worked correctly. Okay, now I don't need this stuff here that I used to check the data, so let's just get rid of this. And so now I'm going to save it. So the next variable I want to work on is the sex variable. So I'm going to put a little comment here. And so now I'm going to call the work data. And the data that are in the working memory are already limited to those aged 20 years and above. And so what I want to do is I want to first look at the way that the sex variable is coded. So I come back over here to my Excel file that I created initially, and here it is right here. So it's RIAGENDR, and it's coded 1 for male, 2 for female, and dot for missing. Missing values are often dots in SAS if it's a numerical variable. So what I want to do here is, instead of coding these 1 and 2, I want to code them 0 and 1. And the form we're going to be using for all of our categorical variables is that we're going to give them numbers starting from 0. So if there are 2 categories, we'll use 0 and 1. If there are 3 categories, we'll use 0, 1, and 2, etc. So we have to just choose one value for 0 here and 1 value for 1. So I'm just going to use 0 for male and 1 for female. So these 1s I need to turn them into 0s, and these 2s I need to turn them into 1s. So I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to copy the variable name, and I'm going to bring this down here. And so what I'm going to say is I'm going to use a SAS statement called an if-then statement. And so what we'll do is, if you start out, it starts out with the word if, and then you put some condition that SAS will check if it's true or not. And so what I want to put as a condition here, I'm going to say, if this value is equal to 1, these would be the males, and then we follow that with the term then. So if this is true, then do something. So now we have to tell it what we want to do. And so what I want to do is I want to recode these 1s as 0s. But the other thing I want to do is I want to create a variable that has a more useful name than RIA gender. And so I'm going to call this sex because this is what I'm calling the variable in my DAG. And then what I like to do with categorical variables is I always like to, on the very end, I like to put how many levels the variable has. And so this has 2 levels, male and female, and so I'm going to call this sex2. And so then what I have to do is I just have to say, what value do I want to give this variable when RIA gender equals 1? And these are the males, and I said that I want to code males as 0, so I'm just going to set sex2 equal to 0 for all of those who have a value like this, which are all the males. And then that is followed by a semicolon. So this is an if-then statement. So if this is true, then do that. That's the structure. So we need to create one here for the females as well. And so females are coded 2, and we said that we want to code those in our variable. We want to code it as 1. And so what we have here is we have the variable sex. It has 2 levels, and we've used the values 0 and 1 to indicate the 2 levels. And so let's just run this, see if the code runs. Seems to be blue. Everything is nice. Now we have one more variable. Sex2 has been added. Before we had 26 variables. Now we have 27. Now I want to check if the coding has been done correctly. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use our proc frequency, which we learned last time is the way we can see the distributions of categorical variables. And what follows is tables. Now what we can do here is we can take this one, and we can cross it with this one. We haven't seen this before. Now we're using an asterisk between the 2 variables with no space in between. And what this is going to do, this is going to give us the cross of these 2 variables, their joint distribution. And so if you run this, let's just run this and see what we get. We can actually just highlight this part and it should run okay. So what we get is we get a table that looks like this, and there's a lot of, it's hard to see, there's a lot of information. There's a better way we can look at this. We may use this kind of view later on, but let me show you a different way to make it look nicer, especially when you're trying to find out if your recodes have worked correctly. Here after the variables, we put a / and we put the word list. Now this is a different form of the proc frequency table, and let me show you what it looks like. So here what it does is it puts the two variables side by side in a list. And what it does is it puts all the different combinations of the two variables that exist. It tells you how many people have those combinations. So one combination that exists is people who have RIA gender equals 1 and who have sex 2 equal to 0. And so these were the males. We said we wanted to recode them as 0. So this is correct. And we've gotten 5,357 like that. And those who are coded 2 are now coded 1 in sex 2. And we can see the frequency here. So from this, we can see that our coding worked correctly because all of the 1s previously are now coded 0 and all of the 2s previously are now coded as 1. And the way we get this form is by putting this slash list in the proc frequency statement. So I'm going to go ahead, things look okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this stuff here. Or actually on second thought, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to take these out because maybe you will want to see these later on. So you know what I can do is I can actually, what I can do is I can comment them out. So I can make these into a comment by putting an asterisk at the beginning of each one. And so now SAS will read this as an asterisk, or read this as a comment rather, and it won't actually run this code. So, but you can see the code as an example of how to do the proc frequency with the slash list. And so to run it, just remember you have to take the asterisks out. Okay, so let me go up here and save this. Now, the next variable I want to clean and recode is the race variable. So I put in my comment here, and so let me go back and see how the race variable is coded. So here it is right here. This is the variable name. So there is 1s are Mexican American, 2 other Hispanic, etc. And the missings are coded dot here. So these values actually will be fine for me. I think that I'm just going to use these values. I probably should check the frequencies in each of the levels. Why don't we do that now? So let's see, I pick up the variable name. And so data, work data, set work data, proc frequency, tables, the variable name, semicolon, and run. And then I just highlight that, hit the run. And so I can see that the smallest race group here in my data set is 543 people. That's bigger than I need. So I think that I'm just going to use these as they are. But remember that we said that we want to, for categorical variables, we want to start with 0. And here they've started with 1. So actually what I probably will do is I will just reduce these numbers by 1. So 0s or 1s will become 0s, 2s will become 1s, 3s will become 2s, etc. So we can do that using the if-then statement that we learned up here. And so what we can do is let's get rid of this proc frequency, or I guess I said I was going to put these as comments. So let me put a comment here. So what I want to do here is if the race variable, and here's the race variable name, if this one is equal to, actually, I don't have to do this. What can I do? You know what I can do? I actually don't have to do it this way. What I can do is I can just define the new variable, which I'm going to call race5, right? Because race is the name that I'm giving to the variable in my DAG. 5 is the number of levels. And I'm going to give this variable a value which is equal to the value of RID, RETH1, subtract 1, minus 1. So 1 minus 1 is 0, 2 minus 1 is 1, etc. And so I can just do that. I can just tell it directly that I want to take the value that's in this variable and I want to subtract 1 from it. And then I hit a semicolon. So here we're learning that you can actually take a variable, take its value and subtract a number away from it and assign that to a different variable. So let's run this and see what happens. So we now have another variable. Before we had 27, now we have 28. Everything is blue. Looks like it worked okay. Let's do a proc frequency to find out if this worked. Proc frequency tables, and the first variable is this one, and I want to cross that with the new variable, and I want to use the /list method because I'm checking if things coded nicely. And so now notice I'm just highlighting these two. I'm not highlighting this one up here. If you don't specify which data set you want to use with a procedure, what SAS will do is it will assume that you want to use the last data set that you used. And the last data set that we used was the data set that's in the working memory that's called work data. And indeed, that's what I want. So I actually don't have to highlight all of this stuff. So I can run it like this. It will use work data to do this, or I could highlight this. Whoops. I could highlight all of this. It'll go back to work data and it will recalculate this variable. It won't hurt anything to do that. It's just extra stuff that doesn't need to be done. So I'm going to go and try this. And let's see what we got here. So you can see the original coding of race. You can see the new variable, and it's just as I want. It goes from 0 to 4 in the same order as the previous variable, but the previous variable started at 1. So this is fine as well. So I'm going to asterisk out these things. Now this might be a good time to introduce something. In SAS, the order in the data set statement, between the data set and the run, the order in which you do things, there are some limitations on it. So generally, if you're going to call any procedures, you need to do that after you've done things like this, calculations on the data, creating new data that don't actually call procedures. So if, for example, I was to try to run this, do a procedure first, and then do this stuff later in the dataset run unit here, it's going to give me an error because things are out of order. The procedures, once you've done a procedure, you can't do these kinds of things anymore. Let's see what it does. So you can see it says it was stopped because of errors. And see, it says statement is not valid or it is used out of proper order. So the proper order is, once you've called a procedure, you can't do this kind of stuff anymore. I'm not sure why SAS does that, but it's just something that it does. So if, for example, you have that kind of, if you see this kind of error, it's out of proper order, think about if you've maybe done something like this. And you can see that if I do this, if I actually change the order here and put this in front of it, now it's gonna be happy. And see, it gave us it, and everything is blue. So that was the problem. That was the problem before. Things are out of the proper order. So just remember that. So I'm going to put it back the way we had it, though, and I'm going to comment this out. So this will actually run now because there are no procedures at all. So there's no worries about the order at all. It's just when you have procedures. Okay, so we've finished two. We finished sex and we finished race. And I realize that maybe it would be good for us to visualize what the code is doing here so that you can understand it more clearly. So let's look at what is happening when this code runs in SAS. And first of all, let's see what the original data look like. What does work data look like before we do any of this code? So initially, we have a sequence number for everybody. Let's just use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These indicate the different individuals' ID numbers. And we have RIAGENDR as part of the original working data set. They're coded 1 and 2, as you'll remember, for male and female. And then we have the race variable, which is RIDRETH, and they're coded 1 to 5. So I've just put some numbers in here to indicate what our working data look like. So for this, what's happening is when SAS sees this, right, we have the data set statement, and then we have a couple of lines of code and the run. When it sees the run, what it's going to do is it's going to apply this set of code between the data set statement and the run. It's going to apply this to every row of data that we have. And so what it's going to do here is it's going to apply, for this first one, it's going to say, it sees if the value is equal to 1, then do something. If the value is equal to 2, then it does something else. So for this one, the value is equal to 1. So in the first line of code here, the statement here is true. RIAGENDR equals 1 is true. So then it's going to do whatever you tell it to do afterwards. And here we tell it that we want to create a variable sex2 and give it a value of 0. So the first time this runs, it's actually going to create the new variable in the data set. And it's going to, because this has a value of 1, it's going to give this one a value of 0. Now it's going to read the next line of code, which says that if RIA gender is equal to 2, then set sex2 equal to 1. But since this is not true for the first line of code, it's not going to do what's afterwards. And so it's just going to leave this as a 0. For the second line, when it hits the first line, when if RIA gender is equal to 1, well, that's false. So it's not going to do what follows. It's only going to take an action for the second line of code. And so this one's going to get a 1. This one's going to get a 0, and a 1. That's actually what it's doing. So it's applying all of these lines of code to every row in the data set, but it only takes an action for one of them because of the way we've set up the logic. So these two lines of code can never be true simultaneously. And so for every row of data, it's only going to take one action. And so our data will end up like this. Now down here for race, what it's doing is it's taking the value of the original race variable, RIDRETH, and it's subtracting 1 and putting that into a new variable called race5. So it's going to create a new variable called race5. Whoops, it looks like race S. It's race5. And so it's going to, for each row of the data, it's going to do this one. We only have one line of code here. So it's going to do it. So it's going to say 5 minus 1 is equal to 4, 3 minus 1 is equal to 2, 2 minus 1 is equal to 1, etc. And so this is actually how this code functions in the data set.